DNA transfer is a big issue just now, because it used to be when DNA started, we had identifiable body fluids. The technique wasn't very sensitive, so blood, semen, saliva, that type of thing. So you could see what you were testing. Now we've got weapons, drug bags, things like that, where we're just swabbing. It's trace evidence. It's invisible. Some people call it touch DNA, and that's a misnomer, because you don't need to touch something.
Yeah.
You know, as I'm speaking just now, my DNA is going all over this table, so I hate to worry you. But, and, you know, so you took this glass and you put it there, right? And I touched that glass. I could pick your DNA up from that glass.
And then if you were to touch something else, you could
You
spread my DNA.
Yes. So that's
Right.
well. Remember that so going back to these swabs.
Yeah.
So you now do a swab, and you find 4 people's DNA on there. Now, you can't say who touched it if they touched it at all. You can't say what order the DNA was deposited. It could be in any one of them that deposited the other 3. So that's the consequence of increasing the sensitivity of the DNA. I mean, DNA doesn't go about on its own, right? It's in cells, like skin cells and so on. So you get about, let's say, between 5 and 10,000 cells on the head of a pin. We can produce a profile from about 10 of those.
Does it get to a point where it's too sensitive?
In my view, yes.
Because
I mean,
it blurs the lines, right?
Sorry?
It blurs the lines.
Well, of course, because now when you've got the blood, semen, saliva, there's a connection with a fluid, which is normally a connection then to the crime. But there may be no connection to the crime with the techniques we're currently using.
So it's leading you down a path that is probably, or not probably, but maybe incorrect.
Well, as well as that, once you get to that level, you're also talking about mostly mixtures of DNA. For the reasons I've just said, you touch something, I touch something, now we've mixed our DNA, we move on to something else. You know, I remember when I was the head of the police lab, 1990 something, right? And I warned about this, that this increasing sensitivity would lead to miscarriages of justice. And so what's happening is that the public remember new DNA, like when it came in.
Yeah.
It was, you know, the magic bullet. Oh, we've got his DNA, therefore it must be him that's the criminal, right? But now, as I've explained, the DNA, your DNA gets places you've never been. That's now become a bit of a phrase everywhere, but I'm patenting it. Your DNA gets places you've never been. Because the example I gave is I shake your hand, go into my car, I've put your DNA in my car, you've never been there. So that creates a real problem. And so from the lawyer's point of view, the prosecution, what they've got to do now is make a consistent story, not just from the DNA, which is why we went through a phase of some saying, oh, we'd never prosecute on DNA alone. Well, I've kind of seen them prosecuting on DNA alone. So, and that's dangerous. And when we come to mixtures, that introduces a whole new level of complexity. Because I mentioned, you know, our DNA on the glass.
Yeah.
So let's say your DNA, or it's just labels I'm using here. Your DNA is AB and mine's CD.
Okay.
So when we make a swab of that glass and look at it in the lab, we see ABCD. So yeah, you could be a contributor to that mixture, and so could I, right? But what about B? If they're a suspect, they could also have contributed to that DNA, even though they actually didn't.
So is the DNA not specific to the person? Is it more like a...
Well, yes and no. But remember, we're mixing people's DNA, and so you produce new profiles. And the example I've just given there, when we mix, excuse me, A, B, C, D, you can now get who could be a contributor. A, B, C, D, AC, BD, and BC. So from that simple mixture, you've now produced 6 suspect profiles.
Yeah.
Now that's just in one area and with a 2-person mixture. Right. So imagine now, it's not just one area, it's not just the ABC area, the other 16 or 20 odd. Once you do that, if you imagine you've created 6 to the 16th or 20th, you go into the billions and trillions of false positives. In other words, profiles that could be considered as contributors, but they're not actual contributors. So you produce more false positives than you produce actual correct results.
And would the police kind of so they've got the DNA evidence, and then they would match that with who is the suspects?
Well, in fact, that's now what's happening, because let's say that there's software that they're using now, called probabilistic genotyping software, and it uses statistics. And what it does is it looks at the profiles and it generates all the possible profiles the software thinks could be there.
Yeah.
And it gives each of them a weight, right? So it might say AB's number 1.
Yeah.
Right. But since BC is also a possible genotype, it will also give that a positive weight. In other words, if somebody's BC, it will produce a high number for them as well, even though they're not contributors. Okay. So the software produces a big list of these genotypes. And what I do is go through it and see where the suspect is. And I've got one just now where he's about 14th on the list.
Jesus. So you need to work your way down every single,
yeah, so it's a lot of work, but it's harder work if he goes to jail, and he shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, my role is to point out the limits of the evidence rather than follow the leader.
Is there a difficulty when it comes to the cooperation of the police department in terms of giving you everything?
Yes. In Scotland,
hit a nerve.
You've hit a nerve on there. Scotland has the most restrictive disclosure regime in the world.
Right.
Okay. I do work in America. In fact, just now, I think I've probably got more cases in New York than anywhere else. Florida, Australia, New Zealand. And the tradition and the correct tradition, the right way to do things, is that the lab should turn over their case files, because that logs everything that they've done, the tests they've done, the results they've done, and allows us to examine it.
Yeah.
In Scotland, they don't do that.
Right.
And we've had I mean, it's on our website. We've had correspondence with the Justice Minister, and everybody's just Teflon shoulders. Oh, it's nothing to do with us.
Right.
And it's the problem. Well, there's 2 problems. One, the Scottish Police Authority. They're the proximal problem, if you like. I mean, it's them that are saying, no, you're not getting this. But I think beyond that is the Justice Minister, who just needs to say to the Scottish Police Authority, just give them the results like every other country in the world. Right. So, but nobody's listening. And when the lawyers as well, maybe not for this case, because they don't want to challenge it. So it's very disappointing. I mean, the Herald did an editorial on this in 2011. That's how long it's been going on. We cannot properly analyse the evidence by simply visiting Gartcosh. The Gartcosh is where the police lab, or the main police lab is. Now, you have to remember here that we're paid by legal aid.
Yeah.
So the Scottish government are paying, the taxpayer, are paying for the Scottish Police Authority to examine this evidence that's going to determine whether somebody goes to jail or not, right? So they've paid for that work. But now when we ask to see it on behalf of the defendant, they say, no, you've got to come to us. So we can't copy it even when we're there. And this only came about when Police Scotland came about, incidentally. It used to be the individual police forces were okay. So, but now I can't, and my colleagues can't discuss it because we can't see it. We can't put it in front of us and discuss it, right? So, and we're supposed to have this so-called peer review, where it's not just one scientist is looking at it, it's 2 scientists.
Is that to remove like bias or prejudice? Or...
Yeah, well, it's not expertise as well.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know everything. nearly everything. And so it's appalling and absurd that in 20 whatever it is, that we have the most restrictive disclosure rules for scientific evidence in the world, and yet nobody seems to care.
It's bizarre.
Wow, that was very informative.
Social